Hello, my internet friends. Evan Benton of Dogg from Air here, and today I'm going to be reviewing a book, The Crime of Galileo by Giorgio di Santillana, I believe it is, because he's Italian, not Spanish. This book was written in 1955, and as it says, it's about the crime of Galileo. So Galileo, of course, born 1564, died 1642 in Italy, and everybody knows the story. He was a martyr for science, which he was declared to be sometime in the 18th or the 19th century, well after he lived and died. But you know, religion has martyrs, so science needs martyrs too if we're going to balance those two things out, which we are going to do in the Enlightenment. So this fits really well into the theme of my channel, which is a history of science and you know how science and religion and belief all kind of fit together. So basically, it's a super duper in-depth book. I had trouble with it because I'm not very familiar with you know, Renaissance history. There's a lot of names thrown around. It's one of the few books where I didn't make it through all the footnotes. But if you are interested in this particular event, I highly recommend it. It's a great resource. So let's go with what everybody knows first. Galileo invented the telescope. Not really, but he was one of the first people to build a telescope, as far as we know. And using that telescope, he proved that the Earth went around the sun, which is called the Copernican model, after Copernicus, as opposed to the previous idea, which was that the sun and all the planets and everything went around the Earth. So Copernicus came up with a mathematical model earlier, and Galileo was able to basically demonstrate this using his observations with that new instrument, the telescope. So what everyone says, right, is that he proved the Bible wrong, and that's where we are today. We don't need religion or you know, superstition anymore. And then his books were banned by Rome, by the church, and he spent the rest of his life under house arrest. And that's what we know. That's the story of the martyrdom of Galileo. So, of course, he didn't prove the Bible wrong. He proved a certain interpretation of the Bible wrong. The Bible doesn't say anywhere in it that the Earth is the center of the solar system. And from the book, basically that's what this entire book is about, is really that there was a massive controversy within the church regarding Galileo and what to do with this new information that he was bringing to the table. So the Catholic Church was deeply divided by Galileo and by Copernicanism before him. And Galileo had support from many cardinals and high-ranking Jesuits during his day. So remember, the Jesuits are the scientific and educational arm of the church. They were the ones who were actually tasked with looking into Galileo's claims and evaluating them. And a lot of them agreed with him, which is really just telling for this whole thing. So the moral of this story is going to be, it's not church versus science, but rather certain elements within the church against one another, and how do we respond to these new scientific advances. So what exactly did he do? Well, in 1632, he wrote a book called The Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, in which he has three imaginary characters debate the merits of the Copernican, which is the heliocentric model on one hand, and the older Ptolemaic, after Ptolemy, geocentric model on the other hand. And he wrote it this way in this in this dialogue to try and get around the censors, to make it like a theoretical problem. He's putting his words in someone else's mouth, but it was obvious which side he was on. He was on the Copernican side, because, for example, he named the character who was the proponent of the Ptolemaic model Simplicio, which means simpleton. And then the other thing about the book that seemed to be egregious was that he wrote in Italian rather than Latin, and by doing so, he was seen to be circumventing the church or the Jesuit order's authority. So the outcome of this case, his trial, was that he was found to be, quote, vehemently suspect of heresy. So he wasn't actually convicted of heresy. He wasn't declared to be a heretic. He was declared to be some, in the Catholic Church, it's just all this bureaucratic craziness. And so he was declared to be some bureaucratic category just shy of a heretic, as heretical as they could get him declared, basically. Which, if you read the book, you'll see that the reasons for that is that there was all this political infighting regarding his claims, and so again, that's the meat of the book. I'm not going to really get into it too much in terms of what it actually says, because it's just so in depth in terms of quoting actual court documents and letters back and forth between different cardinals and the Pope and things like that. But so the hilarious part of the whole ordeal is that Galileo actually gave Pope Urban VIII a copy of his manuscript before he sent it off to the printers, and the Pope approved it. So it doesn't say what exactly happened in the book, but probably what happened is Pope Urban didn't actually read the book. He just signed off of it because him and Galileo were friends. And then afterwards, after it was printed, someone told him, the Pope, what it said, and he was, that Galileo, he pulled one over on me. And so he decided to get the book banned. And so you got to keep in mind that Galileo had been called before the Holy See many times, and he was considered a trusted advisor to the church on scientific matters. He had a long history in dealing with the church and dealing with different church officials and even the Pope on scientific matters. And that's the context that this comes into. It's not like he was just a scientist off doing science and then the church caught wind of his activities. And so the other big point with his trial, with his crime, as it were, is that he was essentially undermining the Jesuits' monopoly on education. And this is not because he necessarily disagreed with him or he was publishing anything that was contrary to their beliefs, but it was just that he was publishing outside accepted channels. So, for example, writing in Italian versus Latin. And you got to remember here, at this time, and even today, every noble in Europe had been educated in Jesuit schools. And Galileo's goal with his writings was specifically to write to the nobility directly, and instead of writing to the scientific community. So and what's sad is that Galileo, he saw that the Jesuits were just losing their monopoly, just naturally, just because of the speed of scientific advancement due to all these instruments that people were inventing was just really kicking up, and he was a faithful son of the church in his own eyes, and he actually wanted the Jesuit order to maintain that monopoly, that power, and that prestige, and so he really saw himself as coming into the church from the inside and trying to speak some reason to these clergymen and trying to get them to understand this new paradigm. So everything he did in terms of getting works published, he did through the church until he didn't, and that's where the problem came about. So, and that's basically the trial. And after the trial, what happened, of course, is yes, he was placed under house arrest. While he was under house arrest, he did write one more book called Two New Sciences, which he wrote in Italian again. Cheeky bugger. And when he died in 1642, the Grand Duke of Tuscany actually tried to have him buried in the Basilica there in Florence. And of course, when the Pope got wind of that, he put the kibosh on it. But finally, in 1737, he had been buried in I guess a cemetery or a mausoleum nearby, and in 1737 his body was exhumed and placed into the basilica where it stands to this day, the Basilica at Florence, beneath a monument which was erected in honor of Galileo in a church. And then in 1741, Pope Benedict XIV finally authorized the publication of the dialogue, albeit somewhat redacted. So after all that, it was only 100 years after his death before he was formally honored by the church. So, of course, just as Galileo predicted, his trial was a disaster for scientific thought in Italy, which never recovered. And the Renaissance continued and spread up into Northern Europe, where the papacy did not have such a stronghold, and the rest, as they say, is history. So, and that's it for the book, basically. Or, as you can tell, well, it's not a super thick book, but it's got a lot of footnotes. It's got a lot of just direct quotes from the proceedings of the trial. So if you're into that kind of stuff, I highly recommend it. And if you're into history of science at all, this is one of the big moments. Okay, and so again, the reason that I'm finding this so interesting is it's just another example of this false dialectic that we're being told all the time, right? This science versus religion type of thing, right? That the two are diametrically opposed. And if you read the book, if you learn about the history of Galileo and what he was about, and most scientists of his day too, because the same was true for Copernicus to a large extent and Johannes Kepler to a large extent. They both were dealing with the church, to the best of their abilities. They were trying to, curry favor with the church and respect the church. And they did get that favor in a lot of cases. They, as I said, with Galileo, he had cardinals on his cardinals on his side. He had Jesuits on his side. He was not alone. When he was on trial, he was being coached right and left what to say, and he had already known these people for, his whole life in some cases. So it just was not the thing of an outsider coming in. It's very much an internal dispute, and that's the real thing. That's the real thing of this story. Not science versus religion, but really just religion versus religion, if you will, or clerics versus clerics. Right? It's an internal debate, and it's super fascinating. But don't get hornswoggled by the whole idea that religion defeated science, or vice versa, science defeated religion sometime in the Renaissance or the Enlightenment, and now we're in this enlightened age, because it just didn't happen that way. Facts don't support it. One more time, the book is The Crime of Galileo by Giorgio di Santillana, and yeah, I recommend it. So this has been Evan Benton, Dogg from Air. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions I can answer about the book. Maybe I'll put a link down to where to buy it below. And subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. If you can support me in any way, I do spend a lot of money on books, so they're not cheap, And that's about it for me. So thanks a lot for watching. And again, Evan Benton, Dogg from Air. Thank you and good night.